Senator from Florida.
Madam President, I stand again in support of our great ally, Israel. The terror and devastation unleashed on Israel by Iran-backed Hamas terrorists has rightly horrified the world. What I'm about to describe is difficult to say and uncomfortable to hear, but it has to be said on the Senate floor. We cannot make this stuff up. The world must know the atrocities that have occurred in Israel. On the morning of Saturday, October 7th, 2023, as families rose to start a new day, make breakfast, or even slowly wake up in their beds, terror approached. Innocent families were murdered in their homes. Babies were killed. Innocent little babies were murdered, and some were ruthlessly beheaded. Children were burned alive. Teenage girls were raped and then burned alive. An elderly wheelchair-bound woman, who was later identified as a Holocaust survivor, was brutally dragged through the streets of Gaza. Children who witnessed the murders of their parents have been kidnapped and are now being held hostage by Hamas. More than 250 young people were savagely murdered while attending a music festival in southern Israel. Many shot in the back as they tried to run away. At least 31 Americans have been killed, and more than 1,400 innocent people were killed in Israel, and we have no idea how many are being held hostage by Iran-backed Hamas terrorists in Gaza. The atrocities are too numerous to fully recount, but the images seen will never leave our memories. I was in a photo of Kfar Aza. I visited this kibbutz I did an AIPAC trip in Israel back in 2019. At the time, it was full of happy families and children, but it's now silenced, completely silenced by brutality and death. This week, I talked to the individual that gave me the tour of the village, or the kibbutz, and it was a beautiful place. Nice people, happy. I was told, and she's only alive because she was not there. She told me that the family that lives next door to her on the right were murdered. Family on their left were murdered. Family down the street were murdered. I was told that Hamas terrorists set fires to force people out of their homes and safe rooms, savagely murdered innocent Israelis, many shot at close range. She told me that she was talking to her sister, who was in a safe room, and the Hamas terrorists were trying to break in. Fortunately, they weren't able to. Children were shot in front of their parents, and some have been kidnapped to Gaza. Iran-backed Hamas terrorists slaughtered the innocent babies in their beds. I met so many people there just a few years. I met so many happy people there a few short years ago. Now I fear a lot of them are going to be dead. We saw Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst report, quote, "Bodies litter the town of Beray. You can see its complete and total destruction. All the houses are destroyed. Looks like many were blown up with RPGs or other explosives. People were shot and killed in their beds, executed at point-blank range. This is the most horrific thing I've seen." Thomas Hand, who's the father of Emily, an 8-year-old girl, who was killed in Hamas in Beray. Thomas had to wait 2 days to be found out that Emily was killed. I'm a father of 2 daughters and the grandfather of 7 grandchildren. Watching this father speak on television about the murder of his daughter is heart-wrenching. He said to CNN, "They just said we found Emily and she's dead." And I went, "Yes." And I smiled. This is what he said. He said, "I smiled because that is the best news of the possibilities that I knew." She's either dead or in Gaza. And he said, "If you know anything about what they do to people in Gaza, that is worse than death." Do you know why they murdered Emily and more than 1,400 other Israelis and 31 Americans that these Iran-backed Hamas killers slaughtered? Simply because they were Jewish. They killed them because they hate Jews and want to kill every Jew. It's unimaginable what these families have suffered. We cannot look away. Let's remember, these were Israeli and American families. The atrocities are too numerous to fully recount, but these stories and the images we have all seen will never leave our memories. Not since the Holocaust has the world witnessed such a brutal attack on the Jewish people. Sadly, The Jewish people have endured thousands of years of hate and persecution, but this will not be the end of Israel or the Jewish people. Israel is surrounded by terrorist groups that want it wiped off the face of the earth. I've seen this firsthand during my 5 visits to Israel, which gave me a clear perspective on Israel's proximity to its enemies, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, and Iran. I want to be clear, Hamas and Hezbollah are not religious groups. They're not a noble political quest for liberty or civil justice. They are terrorist thugs, and they're killers. They're killers who seek to eradicate the Jewish people from this earth, and they are funded and supported by the evil Iranian regime. In August 2021, the Senate voted 99-0 for my amendment to a budget bill to ensure that United States tax dollars do not benefit terrorist organizations such as Hamas. The vote was 99-0. Everyone in this body agrees American taxpayers should never fund Hamas terrorists. Unfortunately, the final text of the bill did not include my language, necessitating further action today. Here's why we need to stop taxpayer funding of terrorist acts. In 2021, Biden's State Department said, quote, "We're going to be working in partnership with the United Nations and the Palestinian Authority to kind of channel aid there in a manner that does its best to go to the people of Gaza," end quote. The official went on to say, quote, "As we've seen in life, as we all know in life, there are no guarantees. But we're going to do everything that we can to ensure that this assistance reaches the people who need it the most," end quote. We all know Hamas controls Gaza. Every dollar that goes to Gaza comes under the control of Hamas, who decides what it's going to do with it. So what I heard from the Biden State Department in 2021 is that the administration can't guarantee that American taxpayer dollars aren't going to fund terrorists and Hamas. The Biden administration thinks the risk of resources going to Hamas terrorists is okay because, quote, "In life, there's no guarantees." I reject that. And I will not leave anything to chance when it comes to preventing U.S. taxpayer money from being sent to the brutal terrorists that have slaughtered so many Israelis and Americans. And we know for a fact that Hamas uses humanitarian aid to support its terrorist acts. Look at this one. This is a humanitarian package. It's a humanitarian UNICEF bag found among the trucks used to carry Iran-backed Hamas terrorists into Israeli towns where they brutally murdered innocent families and burned homes to the ground. I guess there was no guarantee. I've talked to a lot of rabbis in Florida. We have a lot of synagogues, a lot of Chabad's in there, and they told me they've seen lots of pictures on Israeli TV of humanitarian rice bags that when people open them, there are bullets in it. The administration must do better and fully control where American taxpayer money is going. We can. We can make sure American taxpayers aren't funding terrorists. That's why I'm again asking that we pass the Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act. I'm proud to have the support of Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, Mike Braun, Kevin Kramer, and Ted Budd on this bill. What this bill says, it's common sense, is that there's no funds will be authorized for the territory of Gaza till the President certifies to Congress that these funds can be spent without benefiting terrorist organizations. The Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act also ensures U.S. funds are not authorized for expenditure in the territory of Gaza through any United Nations entity or office unless the President can certify that it is not encouraging or teaching anti-Israel and anti-Semitic ideas and propaganda. Pretty basic. And finally, this bill mandates that the President certify that there are no hostages. We know there's hostages in Gaza. There's no hostages held in Gaza for any terrorist organization. Just this morning, President Biden announced $100 million of U.S. aid to Gaza for Gaza and the West Bank. When Iran-backed Hamas terrorists continue attacks against Israel and hold American hostages in Gaza, I can't think of a more critical time to pass this bill. Let me just finish with something that somebody reminded me today. So I know a family in Florida that they lost their sister-in-law, her husband. I think there were 2 6-year-olds and a 3-year-old. So here's the way it works. So they lost their loved ones, but their government is going to tax them to give money to the Palestinian Authority that gives money to terrorists that died killing their family. You can't make this stuff up. So this is a simple bill. So let me now turn it over to my colleague from Indiana, Senator Braun.
Senator from Indiana.
So I was on that trip with Senator Scott back in, I believe, August of 19. And what struck me about that visit, we went onto almost every perimeter in Israel and how they had to be on guard constantly to keep from having something flying into one of their towns or villages. When we did visit the one that Rick referred to, what struck me is they had like a big locker by one of the homes that showed all the unique ways, and I think it was the village nearest to the Gaza Strip, of how many attempts that were made over time. Thank goodness, most of them falling short. But it gave me the impression that there was never a moment of real security. And when we had to see how within those villages, you had to be on guard almost 100% of the time to scurry in to a safe room that would disrupt the normal pace of your life. Imagine if you had to live under those conditions. And here, it's been a long time since anything of this magnitude has come along, probably nearly 50 years. But it shows that it never ends there. And when something like this does happen, I think you've got to, when we've had legislation that looks like was intended to prevent this, and it went through, I think according to the senator, unanimously, this should be a slam dunk that we'd want to make sure that nothing can leak free out of any other type of aid that would help something like this either persist or happen again. If the report in the Wall Street Journal is accurate, Iran was closely involved in the planning and execution of the horrible terrorist act on Israel. If that is the case, then it appears the $6 billion in cash, unfrozen for Iran, freed up resources to aid the attack. We should suspend those funds immediately and permanently. We must also take extra steps to make sure the United States is not inadvertently funding terrorist activities. This bill, a simple one, the Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act, would do just that. Under this bill, the president will have to certify that no U.S. funds are able to go to Hamas or members of Hamas. It would also make sure that funds are not benefiting organizations controlled or influenced by Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or any other terrorist organization. It's simply put in specificity what we all should be for. With President Biden's announcement today that he intends to send $100 million in aid to Gaza, we need this legislation to become law immediately. The American people need to feel confident that their tax dollars are not going to fund the mayhem we saw in Israel at the hands of Hamas terrorists. I yield the floor to the senator from North Carolina.
Madam President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Madam President, on October 7th, Hamas terrorists launched an unprovoked and barbaric series of terrorist attacks inside Israel. Over 1,400 children, women, and men, they were brutally murdered. 31 Americans were killed, and dozens remain missing or held hostage. In the wake of such a despicable series of attacks, we must ensure that our taxpayers here, that our taxpayers are not being, their dollars are not being sent to aid these terrorist killers. 2 years ago, one of our own State Department officials in the Biden administration. He acknowledged that the possibility that aid to the Palestinians could find its way into Hamas' hands. That's unacceptable. And that's why Senator Rick Scott's Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act is so critical right now. It simply states that no U.S. taxpayer dollars would be authorized to Gaza until the president certifies to us, to Congress, that there are measures in place to prevent any taxpayer dollars from benefiting terrorist organizations. At the end of the day, we should be standing shoulder to shoulder with the state of Israel to give them everything that they need to destroy Hamas. I urge the Senate to pass this without delay. And I thank my colleague from Florida for his leadership on this issue, and I yield to him.
My colleagues, Senator Braun
Senator
and
from
Senator
Florida.
Biden, for joining me here on the Senate floor to pass this important legislation. You know, the individual that gave me the tour of the kibbutz, she was telling me that they were just half a mile from Gaza, and before Hamas took over the Gaza area, she was used to be able to walk all the way to the beach, and it was safe. So I think most people in America, no one's against Gazans, but to take any chance that our money goes to Hamas before or after this doesn't make any sense. I think every single member in this body can agree that the United States shouldn't allow a single dollar of taxpayer money to get into the hands of terrorists, funding that is being used to kill innocent Israelis and Americans and hold our citizens, others hostage. I look forward to my colleagues joining me today. I ask unanimous consent that the Foreign Relations Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-489 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the Scott of Florida substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered